The grand palace of the Zelvari Empire stood tall under the twin moons, its golden towers shining like frozen fire in the night. Inside its great halls, Queen Sylvia walked gracefully, her flowing silver robes trailing behind her. She was the ruler of one of the most powerful alien empires, known for her wisdom and fairness. But tonight, something felt different. A strange tension filled the air. As she reached the entrance of her royal chamber, a sudden voice stopped her. "Your Majesty, don't go inside." Startled, she turned and saw Lieutenant Ethan Carter, a human guard assigned to her personal security. His face was serious, his blue eyes filled with urgency. Humans were a rare sight in the palace, but ever since the alliance between Earth and the Zelvari, some had been allowed to serve in trusted positions. Ethan was one of them, known for his sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty. Sylvia frowned. "Why not?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Your husband, the king, he plans to kill you tonight." For a moment, she didn't speak. The words felt unreal. King Vareth, her husband, was the ruler of the empire alongside her. They had disagreements, many, in fact, but he wouldn't try to harm her. Would he? She narrowed her eyes. "That's a serious accusation. What proof do you have?" Ethan looked around quickly, making sure they weren't being watched. Then he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "I overheard him speaking with his advisor. He ordered your chamber guards to ensure you didn't leave. He said you wouldn't live to see the sunrise." Sylvia's breath caught in her throat. That couldn't be true. Vareth was ambitious, yes, but he needed her to rule. Yet, deep inside, she knew something had changed in him recently. He had been more distant, more secretive. Was this why? Still, it was hard to believe. "Maybe you misunderstood," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, Your Majesty. I know what I heard. He sees you as an obstacle to his power. If you enter that chamber, you won't come out alive." Sylvia hesitated. The logical side of her said that a human guard could not possibly know more than she did about her own palace. But another part of her, the one that had kept her alive through political games and power struggles, told her to listen. She turned her gaze toward her chamber doors. Two royal guards stood there, their expressions cold and unreadable. Normally, they would bow at her approach, but now they simply watched. A chill ran down her spine. Ethan saw her hesitation and stepped even closer. "If I'm wrong, you can punish me however you wish. But if I'm right, we don't have much time." Sylvia's fingers tightened around the edges of her robe. Finally, she nodded. "What do you suggest?" Ethan exhaled in relief. "We need to leave the palace. Now." She looked at him in disbelief. "Leave? That's impossible. Every exit is guarded. I can't just disappear." "You can if you trust me," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but she could see the concern in his eyes. "I know a way out. I've been watching the security patterns for months. But we have to go before they realize you didn't enter your chamber." Sylvia glanced at the guards again. She realized something. If she walked away now, they would try to stop her. And if they tried to stop her, it would mean Ethan was telling the truth. She turned back to Ethan. "Lead the way." Without another word, Ethan moved quickly, guiding her through the hallways. He walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Sylvia followed, her heartbeat quickening. They passed through a side corridor, where more guards were stationed. Ethan casually nodded to them, acting as if nothing was wrong. The guards didn't react, yet, but they couldn't keep this up for long. They turned another corner, and Ethan led her into a small storage room. He pressed his hand against a hidden panel on the wall. With a quiet hiss, a secret door slid open, revealing a narrow passage. Sylvia's eyes widened. "How did you?" "No time," Ethan interrupted. "This leads to the lower levels of the palace. From there, we can escape into the city." She hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. Ethan followed and sealed the entrance behind them. The passage was dark, cold, and smelled of dust, but it was safe. For now, as they moved deeper into the tunnel, Sylvia's mind raced. If Ethan was right, then everything she believed about her husband was a lie. And if the king wanted her dead, what else had he been hiding? For the first time in her life, Queen Sylvia felt truly vulnerable. But she wasn't alone. Ethan, a mere human, had risked everything to warn her. And now he was her only hope of survival. The hidden passage was dark and narrow, the air thick with the scent of dust and damp stone. Queen Sylvia moved carefully, her silken robes whispering against the walls, as she followed Ethan through the winding tunnel. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of his warning pressing heavily on her mind. King Vareth wanted her dead. It still felt unreal, like a terrible dream she would wake up from. But the way the palace guards had acted, the way they had simply watched her without bowing, without even acknowledging her presence, had sent chills through her. They were waiting for her to step inside her chamber so they could lock the doors and follow their orders. Ethan moved ahead of her, his steps light and sure, despite the near-total darkness. "Stay close, Your Majesty," he whispered. "We're not safe yet." Sylvia took a steadying breath. "How do you know about this passage?" "I spent months studying the palace layout," Ethan replied, keeping his voice low. "It was part of my security training. I memorized every escape route in case of emergencies." That made sense. The human soldiers assigned to the royal family were known for their discipline and intelligence. Even so, she had never expected a simple palace guard to risk his life for her. They continued deeper into the passage, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps. The tunnel sloped downward, the walls growing rougher, less polished. This was an old part of the palace, perhaps even older than the empire itself. After what felt like an eternity, Ethan stopped in front of a heavy metal door. He placed his hand against a control panel, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. Beyond it was a dimly lit underground chamber, lined with crates and supplies. "This leads to the lower levels," Ethan said, stepping through. "We're beneath the palace now. If we keep going, we'll reach the old servant tunnels that connect to the outer city." Sylvia followed him inside, her mind still racing. "And then what? Where will we go?" Ethan turned to face her. "I know people. Humans, traders, smugglers. They can get us off-world if we need to leave." Sylvia's breath caught. Leaving the palace was one thing. Leaving the empire entirely was something else. She had ruled for years, worked tirelessly to bring peace and order to her people. She couldn't just run. But if she stayed, she would die. A sudden noise interrupted her thoughts. A sharp metallic clang echoed through the chamber. Someone was coming. Ethan reacted instantly. He grabbed Sylvia's arm and pulled her behind a stack of crates. "Stay down," he whispered. The door they had entered through hissed open again. Heavy footsteps rang out, followed by the deep voices of palace guards. "She didn't enter her chamber," one of them said. "Then she must still be inside the palace," another replied. "The king ordered her dead before dawn. We can't fail." Sylvia felt a cold chill spread through her body. There was no doubt now. Ethan had been right. She risked a glance from behind the crates. 4 guards stood in the chamber, scanning the room. They were armed with energy rifles, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Ethan's grip on her wrist tightened. "We can't fight them," he murmured. "But we can't stay here either." Sylvia's mind raced. She had spent years in political battles, but this was different. This was survival. Then she saw it. Another door, half hidden behind a stack of supply containers. A second exit. She nudged Ethan and pointed. He nodded in understanding. But the guards were too close. If they moved now, they would be seen. Ethan took a slow breath. "I'll create a distraction," he whispered. Sylvia's eyes widened. "You'll be caught." He gave her a faint smile. "Not if I'm fast." Before she could argue, Ethan grabbed a small metal tool from his belt and flung it across the chamber. It clattered loudly against a crate on the far side of the room. The guards spun toward the noise. "There," one shouted, raising his rifle. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Sylvia's hand and sprinted toward the hidden door. They reached it just as one of the guards turned back. "Wait, there." A shot rang out. Ethan shoved the door open, pushing Sylvia through before diving in after her. The blast struck the wall behind them, sending sparks flying. He slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. "We need to move," Ethan urged. Sylvia didn't hesitate this time. She ran, following him through another narrow passage. The sound of shouting guards echoed behind them. They weren't safe yet, but they were still alive. And as long as they were alive, there was still a chance. For the first time in her life, Sylvia realized she wasn't just a queen. She was a fugitive, and the only person she could trust was a human. The passage was narrow and cold, the walls damp with age. Queen Sylvia followed Ethan as fast as she could, her breath coming in short gasps. The sound of boots pounding against the stone behind them sent fear racing through her veins. The guards were coming. Ethan led her down the twisting tunnel, moving with the skill of a trained soldier. He knew exactly where to step, exactly how to move without making noise. But Sylvia was no soldier. She had spent her life in grand halls, not running for her life in dark tunnels. A sharp pain shot through her ankle as she stumbled. Ethan turned instantly, catching her before she could fall. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp with worry. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. She shook her head, though her ankle throbbed. "I can keep going." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Stay close. We don't have much time." The tunnel split into two paths ahead. Ethan hesitated for just a second before pulling her toward the left. The voices of the guards echoed behind them, growing louder. "She must be down here," one of them shouted. Sylvia's heart pounded. They were too close. Ethan suddenly stopped and pressed his hand against a section of the wall. There was a faint click, and a hidden door swung open. "Inside," he whispered urgently. Sylvia didn't question him. She slipped through the door, and Ethan followed, closing it behind them. They stood in complete darkness, the only sound their quiet breathing. Through the thick stone, they could hear the guards running past. She couldn't have gone far. "We'll search both tunnels. Keep moving." The footsteps faded as the guards split up, heading in different directions. Sylvia let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Ethan remained still, listening carefully until he was sure they were gone. "We don't have long," he murmured. "They'll realize soon that this passage exists." Sylvia touched the rough stone wall beside her. "Where are we?" "An old maintenance tunnel," Ethan explained. "It connects to the palace's lower storage chambers. If we're lucky, we can use it to escape into the city." "Lucky," Sylvia repeated, raising an eyebrow. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. "Humans believe in luck." She almost smiled in return but stopped herself. There was no time for humor. They moved carefully through the tunnel, the air growing cooler as they went deeper. Ethan led the way, stopping every so often to check for danger. Sylvia followed, her mind racing. She had known Vereth to be ambitious, but she never thought he would turn against her so violently. What had changed? Had he always planned this, waiting for the perfect moment, or had something pushed him into action? A sudden sound interrupted her thoughts. A faint humming noise, not from behind them. This was ahead. Ethan held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He moved forward slowly, peeking around the corner of the passage. Sylvia inched closer, her breath caught in her throat. What she saw made her stomach twist. A security checkpoint. The passage opened into a small chamber with a single guard standing in front of a locked door. A security console glowed beside him, the red light indicating restricted access. Ethan cursed under his breath. "We need to get through there." Sylvia stared at the guard. He was Exceltheri, one of her own people. If she revealed herself, would he help her? Or had Vereth turned everyone against her? Ethan studied her expression. You're thinking of talking to him, aren't you? She hesitated. He might listen. He might also call for backup. Ethan shook his head. It's too risky. Sylvia clenched her fists. She was tired of running. Then what do we do? Ethan's eyes narrowed as he examined the room. Then he smirked. I have an idea. Sylvia watched in surprise as he reached into his belt and pulled out a small device, a human-made stun grenade. Cover your ears, he whispered. Before she could argue, he threw the grenade. It rolled across the floor, stopping near the guard's feet. A flash of light, a sharp crackle of energy. The guard collapsed instantly, his weapon falling from his hands. Ethan was already moving. He sprinted forward, grabbing the fallen guard's access card and swiping it against the console. The red light turned green, and the door slid open. Let's go. Sylvia followed, her heart pounding. They rushed through the door and into another passage, leaving the unconscious guard behind. The fresh air hit her like a wave. They had made it outside. The palace loomed behind them, its tall towers glowing against the night sky. The city stretched out before them. Dark alleys, towering buildings, the hum of distant vehicles. They had escaped, but they were far from safe. Ethan turned to her. We need to disappear. Fast. Sylvia straightened, her fear replaced with determination. She was no longer just a queen on the run. She was a survivor, and she would not let Vereth win. The cold night air wrapped around Queen Sylvia as she stepped out of the palace tunnels. For the first time in her life, she stood outside the royal walls without guards or servants at her side. The grand city of Selvar stretched before her, its towering spires glowing with soft blue lights. The streets below were filled with movement, citizens finishing their daily work, hovering transports gliding through the air, and neon signs flickering in the distance. Ethan pulled her into the shadows of a nearby alley. His sharp eyes scanned the area, looking for threats. We don't have much time. Vereth will realize you're missing soon. Sylvia nodded, her heart still racing. Where do we go? Ethan pointed toward the lower district. We blend in. Disappear. She hesitated. Disappear. A queen couldn't simply vanish among commoners. But she wasn't just a queen anymore. She was a fugitive. As they moved through the city, Sylvia noticed something strange. No one seemed to recognize her. People walked past without giving her a second glance. Ethan smirked. Your face is all over palace banners. But the people down here, they don't see you every day. You're just another stranger in the crowd. Sylvia wasn't sure if she should feel relieved or insulted. They walked deeper into the district, where the buildings were older and the streets narrower. The glow of the palace was far behind them now. The air smelled of oil and metal, mixed with the scent of street food from small vendor stalls. Ethan led her through twisting paths, turning corners quickly, making sure they weren't being followed. Then suddenly, a holographic broadcast flickered to life on a massive screen above the street. A news anchor, his voice urgent, spoke in the Selthari language. Breaking news. Queen Sylvia has vanished from the palace. Reports suggest she may be in danger. A search is underway. A blurry image of Sylvia appeared on the screen. Her heart pounded. Ethan grabbed her wrist. Time to move. But it was too late. Someone in the crowd had seen the screen. Then their eyes locked onto her. Recognition. Shock. And then, a scream. She's here. The queen. Someone call the guards. Panic spread through the street like wildfire. More people turned, pointing, whispering, gasping. A few stepped back in respect, but others pulled out their communication devices. Ethan cursed under his breath. Run. Sylvia didn't argue. They pushed through the crowd, sprinting down the alley. Behind them, alarms blared. They'll lock down the district soon, Ethan said, leading her toward an old, rusted transport parked near a small workshop. He pulled open the hatch and motioned for her to get inside. We can't steal this, Sylvia protested. Borrowing, Ethan corrected. And trust me, This is the only way out. With no other choice, she climbed in. Ethan hotwired the controls, and the transport hummed to life. The engines sputtered, then roared. From behind them, armored guards poured into the streets. There they are. Stop them. Ethan grinned. Too late. He hit the accelerator, and the transport shot forward. The streets blurred as they raced through the city, dodging traffic and cutting sharp corners. Sylvia held onto the seat, her breath catching as they narrowly avoided colliding with another vehicle. "They'll be tracking us," she said. Ethan smirked. "Not if I can help it." He slammed a few buttons on the dashboard, and the transport suddenly shifted directions, diving into a tunnel that led underground. The lights flickered as they sped through the passage, then emerged into a hidden marketplace deep below the city. The transport came to a stop. Ethan turned to her. "This is where we disappear." Sylvia looked around. The underground market was packed with aliens of all kinds, trading goods, speaking in hushed voices. It was a place where people who didn't want to be found came to hide. For the first time, she truly understood. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was a fugitive, and her fight for survival was just beginning. The underground marketplace was nothing like Queen Sylvia had ever seen before. It was a maze of dimly lit corridors, filled with traders, smugglers, and outcasts from different worlds. The air was thick with the scent of spices, metal, and machine oil. Bright neon signs flickered in various alien languages, advertising everything from food to illegal technology. Sylvia pulled the hood of her cloak lower over her face. Her heart still pounded from the chase above. They had escaped, for now, but she knew it wouldn't last. Ethan walked beside her, his posture relaxed, but his sharp eyes scanned everything. He had been here before. He knew how to move through this world without drawing attention. "We need a safe place," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "I know someone." They weaved through the crowd, slipping between stalls and darkened doorways until they reached a small shop built into the stone walls of the underground tunnels. The door slid open with a creak as Ethan stepped inside, pulling Sylvia along. A hunched old alien with 4 arms and dark gray skin looked up from behind the counter. His large eyes narrowed when he saw Ethan. "Well, well," the old alien said in a raspy voice. "Look who's back. Thought you were dead, human." "Not yet, Torv," Ethan said with a smirk, "but I might be if you don't help me." Torv's gaze shifted to Sylvia. His eyes widened slightly, and then he let out a low chuckle. "You bring interesting company. She's important, isn't she?" Ethan didn't answer. He just placed a small metal chip on the counter. "We need a place to hide." Torv picked up the chip, inspecting it closely. Then he nodded. "I know a place, but it's not free." "I figured," Ethan said. "We'll owe you." Torv let out another chuckle. "You already owe me, human, but fine. Follow me." He led them through a hidden passage behind his shop, down a narrow set of stairs that opened into a small dark room. There was a single cot, a table with an old data pad, and barely enough space to move. "It's not much," Torb said, "but no one will find you here." Sylvia looked around. It was nothing like the grand chambers of the palace. No golden walls, no soft cushions, no warm lights, just cold metal and stone. She took a deep breath. "It's perfect." Torv turned to Ethan. "You should rest while you can. The whole city is looking for her." Ethan nodded. "I know." Torv left, sealing the door behind him. Sylvia sat on the cot, pulling the cloak tighter around her. Her mind was spinning. How had it come to this? A few hours ago, she had been a queen. Now she was a fugitive, hiding in the shadows. She looked at Ethan. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted." She waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled a small device from his pocket and checked the news. The reports were everywhere. The palace was in lockdown. Vareth had declared a state of emergency. He had even given orders to search the lower districts. "They won't stop looking for you," Ethan said. "He'll do anything to bring you back." Sylvia clenched her fists. "I won't go back." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we need a plan." The Queen of Selvar was no longer a ruler in a palace. She was a fugitive in a dark, hidden world, and she was ready to fight for her freedom. Sylvia sat on the small cot, staring at the dim light flickering on the ceiling. The room felt suffocating, but she knew this was the safest place for now. Outside, the city was searching for her. Her husband, Vereth, had likely placed spies everywhere. She had always known he was ambitious, but she never thought he would try to kill her. Ethan leaned against the wall, checking the small communication device. His brows furrowed as he read the latest news. They'd locked down the upper districts. Vereth's men are checking every ship that leaves the planet. We can't just walk out of here. Sylvia let out a slow breath. Then what do we do? Ethan smirked. We do what humans do best. We improvise. He knelt down and spread out a small holographic map of the underground tunnels. There's a secret way into the spaceport. Smugglers use it all the time. But we need a ship, and we need a way past security. Sylvia frowned. Do you know someone with a ship? Ethan hesitated. I know someone, but she doesn't like me very much. Before Sylvia could ask why, a knock echoed through the metal walls. Ethan immediately pulled out his weapon, signaling her to stay quiet. He moved to the door, keeping his back to the wall as he pressed a button on his wrist device. A small screen showed the visitor, Torv. Ethan sighed and opened the door. The old alien shuffled in, his 4 arms holding a small box. He placed it on the table, then looked at Sylvia. You are lucky to be alive, Queen. Sylvia straightened. I won't be if we don't get off this planet. Torv chuckled. Then you will need this. He opened the box, revealing 2 small metallic discs, identity changers. They won't hold up to deep scans, but they will fool the basic security checks. Sylvia picked up one of the discs. Why are you helping us? Torv grinned, showing sharp teeth. Let's just say I don't like your husband very much. Ethan laughed. That makes 2 of us. Torv looked at Ethan. And your friend, is she willing to help? Ethan sighed. Only one way to find out. The meeting place was an abandoned docking station in the lower district. The air smelled of rust and fuel, and the only light came from flickering signs above empty shops. Ethan led Sylvia through the shadows until they reached a small cargo ship. Standing in front of it was a tall, dark-haired woman in a long coat. She crossed her arms as Ethan approached. I must be dreaming, she said. Ethan Carter, asking me for a favor. Ethan smirked. Hello, Captain Reyna. Miss me? Reyna rolled her eyes. Not even a little. What do you want? Ethan gestured to Sylvia. We need a way off this planet. Reyna glanced at Sylvia, then back at Ethan. And why should I risk my ship for you? Ethan stepped closer. Because I know you love a good challenge. Reyna narrowed her eyes. And because you owe me. Ethan sighed. Yes, and because I owe you. Reyna smirked. Now that's what I like to hear. She turned to Sylvia. You better be worth the trouble, Your Highness. Sylvia lifted her chin. I am. Reyna nodded. Good, because we leave tonight. The plan was risky. Reyna's ship had clearance to leave the planet, but Vereth's forces were watching every launch. The identity changers would help, but they needed a distraction to draw attention away from the ship. Ethan grinned as he pulled out a small detonator. I think I can handle that. Sylvia looked at him surprised. Are you always this reckless? Ethan winked. Only when it works. The Queen of Selvar was about to escape, but Vereth wouldn't let her go so easily. The final battle was coming. The night was tense. The air at the docking station felt heavy with the weight of danger. Sylvia stood near the entrance ramp of Reyna's ship, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment she would escape Vereth's grasp. If they failed, There would be no second chance. Ethan adjusted his jacket and checked his weapon. All right, everyone knows the plan. Reyna leaned against the ship's hull, arms crossed. You cause chaos. I get us out of here. Simple enough. Torv, the old alien, gave a small chuckle. Just don't get yourselves killed. Sylvia watched as Ethan pulled out a small device from his belt, a detonator linked to several small charges hidden across the spaceport. It wasn't meant to destroy anything, just enough to create a distraction. He smirked and pressed the button. Boom. The explosion was small but loud enough to shake the ground. Smoke rose from the far end of the docking area. Alarms blared instantly. Guards shouted orders, their attention snapping toward the fire. Ethan grinned. That should keep them busy. Reyna nodded. All right, let's move. She led them up the ramp and into the ship's main cabin. The door hissed shut behind them as she ran to the cockpit. Her fingers danced over the controls, bringing the engines to life. Hold on, she called as the ship lifted off the ground. Outside, Vereth's guards realized their mistake too late. They turned their weapons toward the escaping vessel, but the ship was already rising. A few energy blasts struck the hull, but the shields held strong. Come on, come on, Reyna muttered as she steered toward the sky. Then, the comm system crackled to life. Unauthorized vessel, stand down immediately. It was Vereth's voice, cold, commanding, furious. Sylvia clenched her fists. She knew her husband wouldn't give up so easily. Reyna sighed. I hate this part. She flipped a switch, and the ship's engines roared as they accelerated toward the atmosphere. Behind them, Vereth's warships were already in pursuit. Ethan cursed. They're sending fighters after us. Reyna smirked. Let them try. The ship twisted through the air, dodging laser fire as the enemy ships closed in. Ethan took a seat at the weapons console, activating the ship's defense systems. The cabin shook as he fired back, taking down one of the pursuing fighters. Sylvia gripped the armrest of her seat. Will we make it? Reyna flashed a grin. Of course, I'm the best pilot in the system. But then, a warning light flashed red. Incoming missile. Ethan's eyes widened. Reyna. I see it. She yanked the controls, sending the ship into a sudden dive. The missile barely missed them, exploding just behind their tail. The shockwave rocked the ship, but it held together. We can't keep this up, Sylvia shouted. Reyna's eyes narrowed. I just need a little more speed. Ethan checked the radar. They're closing in fast. Torb suddenly spoke up. I might have an idea. Everyone turned to him. There's a hidden asteroid field nearby. If we get there, we can lose them. Reyna didn't hesitate. Coordinates. Torv punched them into the nav system. There, but it's dangerous. Reyna laughed. More dangerous than staying here. With a hard turn, she sent the ship speeding toward the asteroid field. The enemy fighters followed, but they didn't expect what came next. Massive chunks of rock floated aimlessly, spinning in unpredictable patterns. It was a death trap for anyone who couldn't navigate properly. Reyna gritted her teeth. Time to see if they can keep up. The ship weaved through the asteroids, dodging left and right with expert precision. The enemy ships weren't so lucky. One crashed into a massive rock, exploding instantly. Another tried to follow too closely and was struck by debris. Ethan whooped. That's two down. But Vereth's command ship was still behind them. Sylvia turned to Reyna. How do we escape that? Reyna smirked. Watch and learn. She aimed the ship toward the largest asteroid in the field. The command ship followed, trying to match her movements. At the last second, Reyna pulled up sharply. Their ship narrowly avoided the asteroid, but Vereth's ship was too big to maneuver in time. Crash. The asteroid struck the command ship's wing, sending it spinning out of control. Smoke and fire erupted from its hull. Sylvia let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Is it over? Ethan leaned back. Looks like it. Reyna grinned. Told you I was the best. As they left the asteroid field, the ship finally reached the jump point. Reyna activated the hyperdrive, and with a flash of light, they were gone. Free at last. Sylvia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her past finally lifting. Ethan smiled at her. So, what now, Your Highness? She opened her eyes, determination burning within them. Now, I take back my kingdom. Ethan chuckled. Well, that's going to be fun. Reyna sighed. You two are going to get me into more trouble, aren't you? Sylvia smiled. Probably. The stars stretched before them, endless and full of possibilities. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long while, the Queen of Selvar had hope. And with humans by her side, she knew she would win. The end.